Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio Channel. Tonight we step into Mississippi in 1850, where the air hangs warm over the river and the cotton fields spread so wide they seem to swallow the horizon. You can almost hear the soft hiss of leaves in the dark, the creak of wagon wheels in the mud, the low call of someone already awake before dawn has even thought about arriving. It is a landscape people once praised as rich and beautiful. But that beauty comes with a terrible secret pressed into every furrow of the soil. Who cleared these fields? Who bent under the sun? Who paid for this comfort with aching hands and broken sleep? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell me your location and local time in the comments, because I always love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, and you begin walking into the Mississippi night, where the smell of wet earth rises around you, and the cotton kingdom waits in uneasy silence. You enter a world built on softness and pain. Cotton looks harmless from a distance. The plants sit low and ordinary, with pale blooms that later turn into fluffy white bowls. In a shop far away, a bolt of cotton cloth might seem clean, simple, even innocent. Here, it is something else entirely. It is wealth, punishment, status, noise, dust, and exhaustion, all packed into one crop. Mississippi in 1850 stands near the center of that world. The state has become one of the richest cotton regions in the United States, at least if you count wealth for the people who own land, own labor, and write the numbers in the account books. The land itself helps explain why. Beneath your feet lies dark, fertile soil, especially in the Delta lowlands, where river deposits have built a broad plain that can produce extraordinary harvests. The ground feels dense and slightly damp under your boots. It smells of clay, roots, and old water. When the breeze shifts, you catch the scent of cane, livestock, smoke, and the heavy sweetness of late summer growth. The Mississippi River and its smaller branches act like long highways, carrying cotton bales toward market towns and then onward to New Orleans. The river also brings people, news, disease, tools, cloth, barrels of pork, and endless ambition. It is not a quiet frontier anymore. It is a machine. You feel that machine in the scale of the plantations. Some farms are modest by local standards, though that word does some suspiciously polite work. Others stretch across hundreds or even thousands of acres, with the main house placed on a rise if the land allows, as if elevation itself could turn power into elegance. The road leading in is often lined with trees. There may be columns at the front, porches built for catching breezes, and windows meant to signal refinement. Visitors are supposed to notice the order of it all. They are supposed to admire the white paint, the polished silver, the imported wallpaper, the piano in the parlour. They are not supposed to dwell too long on the rows of cabins set apart from the house, on the workyard, on the gin house, on the overseer's presence, or on the fact that every board and brick depends on forced labour. And yet those realities are impossible to miss once you stand still and listen. A plantation at night is not silent. It groans. Wood contracts in the cooling air. Insects trill from the grass. Frogs pulse from the ditches. Somewhere a mule stamps and snorts. Chains may rattle from a harness. You hear a distant cough, a baby's cry, the muted scrape of feet on packed dirt. Smoke from cooking fires lingers low, carrying the smell of cornmeal, fat, ashes, and sometimes greens simmered down to their last honest flavour. The cabins, often built from rough logs or boards with gaps that let in heat, cold, and insects alike, hold families who have already worked long hours and will do so again. Their lives are squeezed by the demands of cotton, but not erased by them. That distinction matters. The people who rule this place like to speak of management, order, and productivity. They have a special fondness for words that sound tidy. Planters often kept ledgers with shocking care. They wrote down pounds picked, tools issued, births, deaths, purchases, punishments, weather, debts, and sales. Human lives appear beside mule feed and wagon repairs as if the whole arrangement were reasonable. It is one of history's more chilling tricks. Brutality loves paperwork. Nothing says civilization quite like recording suffering in neat columns and pretending the pen makes it moral. By 1850, cotton is the dominant cash crop of the Deep South, and Mississippi has become deeply tied to it. The invention and spread of the cotton gin in earlier decades helped separate seeds from short staple cotton more efficiently, making large-scale production vastly more profitable. That fact appears in almost every basic history of the region, and for good reason. It matters. But what can get lost in the textbook version is how that efficiency did not reduce labour. It expanded demand for it. More land was cleared, more people were enslaved, more fields were planted, more fortunes were chased. A machine that saves labour in one stage can produce more labour in another, especially when greed is steering. You move closer to the fields, and even in darkness they seem endless. The rows are arranged with strict intention, running in lines that guide the eye toward the horizon. During the growing season, the leaves form a textured green surface under the moonlight. Later, when the bolls open, the fields look almost ghostly at dawn, flecked with white as if a strange frost had chosen one of the hottest places in America. Travellers sometimes commented on the beauty of that sight. They were not wrong exactly. They were incomplete. Beauty and cruelty share space more often than people like to admit. The labour behind those fields is organised with relentless discipline. Enslaved workers are assigned gangs or task groups depending on the plantation's methods, the season, and the owner's habits. Adult field hands do the hardest outdoor labour, but children work too, and older people often remain useful to the system in some way, whether through childcare, spinning, mending, hauling water, or work close to the quarters. A large plantation can operate almost like a small forced labour camp, with blacksmithing, carpentry, animal care, food preparation, and textile work all folded into daily survival. Cotton may be king, but a king is needy. It wants fences repaired, animals fed, tools sharpened, clothes patched, and meals cooked before daylight. Mississippi planters are not a uniform type, though many would have liked that compliment. Some are born into local families, others arrive from older southern states, carrying enslaved people with them, or purchasing them after arrival. Some live on their plantations, others prefer townhouses and leave the daily discipline to overseers. The overseer is often feared, sometimes hated with an intensity that burns through memory. He is the man of schedules, quotas, correction, and constant watching. His horse becomes a sound people recognize from far away, hooves on dirt, leather creaking, a cough, a shout. The whole day can tighten around that sound. Historians still argue over how much authority individual overseers truly exercise without planter interference, because surviving records often reflect the planter's voice more than the lived experience of the enslaved. That uncertainty matters because power on a plantation could shift from season to season, and cruelty did not always arrive wearing the same face. Sometimes it came through direct violence, sometimes through rationing, surveillance, or the threat of sale. Sometimes through the quiet knowledge that your family's stability depended on a man's mood after breakfast. There is another piece of the Mississippi story that sits just below the polished surface. Many plantations in 1850 are not ancient family estates at all. They are relatively recent creations, carved out during the great expansion of cotton agriculture into lands taken from native peoples. Choctaw removal in the 1830s opened vast tracts to white settlement and speculation. That means the plantation landscape you're walking through is newly arranged, ambitious, and hungry. Forest becomes field. Field becomes profit. Profit becomes status. Underneath it all lies dispossession layered upon enslavement, which is a very efficient way of ruining a place while calling it development. The main house kitchen, if you pause near it, gives off another set of smells: lard, coffee, wood smoke, molasses, possibly biscuits, if the household is comfortable enough to take comfort seriously. The house servants who prepare and carry that food live under a different set of pressures from field hands, but not an easier moral climate. They are watched closely, expected to move with precision, and often forced into intimate proximity with the planter family's habits and tempers. A dropped tray or delayed response can bring consequences. So can being too visible. So can being too invisible. Plantation households are full of rules that shift like smoke and still manage to cut like wire. Outside, in the quarters, food is plainer. Cornmeal is common. Pork may be issued in measured amounts. Gardens, fishing, trapping, and hidden exchanges can make the difference between mere survival and something slightly less bleak. You might smell peas cooking, onions if someone has them, maybe a rabbit if luck has visited. Sometimes enslaved people used gourds as containers, ladles or bowls, and in some places hollowed gourds were turned into instruments. One quirky detail that drifts through old accounts is the use of dried bottle gourds as fiddles, resonators, or simple household tools. Small acts of making something useful and even beautiful from what was available. A plantation system tries to reduce people to labour units, and people answer by creating culture anyway. It must have irritated the masters beyond measure. You notice the clothing too, because cloth matters deeply in a cotton world. There is a bitter irony here sharp enough to keep you awake. The people forced to grow cotton often wear coarse garments issued sparingly, sometimes made from a rough fabric known as osnaburg or cheap wool blends in colder months. Cotton enriches the plantation, but comfort does not flow generously toward the hands that produce it. Bare feet are common in warm weather. Shoes, when issued, may fit poorly and wear out fast. The touch of such clothing against the skin is scratchy, damp with sweat by midday, stiff when newly distributed, then softened slightly by repeated wear and washing. The body remembers every seam. What does morning look like here? Not peaceful. Even before sunrise, motion begins. Fires are stirred, infants are shifted on tired shoulders, water is fetched. A horn or bell may summon workers, and that sound carries over the fields with a flat authority that feels almost physical. The air before dawn can be cooler than you expect, touched with river damp, but relief is brief. Heat builds quickly once the light comes. By afternoon, shirts cling to the skin, dust settles at the throat, and every movement costs more than it should. Mosquitoes whine near standing water, gnats gather at the eyes. The sun does not shout. It presses. You walk past the gin house and think about what happens after picking. Cotton must be cleaned, packed, and pressed for transport. The gin itself is noisy, full of motion and fibres, and dangerous enough to command respect from anyone with fingers. Fine lint drifts through the air and settles on surfaces. It gets into hair, onto skin, into lungs. It softens edges visually while making labour harsher physically, which feels like the crop's favourite joke. Even the dust here is deceptive. For all the planter talk about paternal care, the economic logic underneath is unsentimental. Enslaved people in Mississippi are held as property under law. They can be bought, sold, mortgaged, inherited, and used as collateral. Families can be split. Marriages have no legal protection that white authorities are bound to respect. Children increase an owner's claimed wealth on paper. None of this is hidden in 1850. It is not an unfortunate side effect. It is the system itself. That is the harsh reality at the centre of the moonlit scene, the truth sitting beneath every porch lamp and cotton row. And yet, as the night deepens, you sense something that the ledgers cannot fully contain. Inside the cabins, voices lower and soften. Someone hums. Someone tells a child to lie still. Someone rubs aching wrists. Someone braids hair by firelight. Someone laughs once quietly, despite everything, which may be one of the bravest sounds on earth. The plantation wants obedience, output, and silence. It does not quite get them. It gets labour. Yes. It gets wealth. Yes. But it never fully masters the interior life of the people it tries to own. So you stand there in Mississippi in 1850, breathing in smoke and damp soil, hearing insects pulse in the grass and the river move somewhere beyond sight. The fields look serene under the stars. The house sits composed. The road lies still. But the calm is false, carefully staged, and paid for in human suffering so constant that the landscape itself seems trained not to mention it. That is how cotton country introduces itself. Soft to the eye, hard to the bone, impossible to understand honestly unless you listen for the people whose hands built the silence. You wake inside a world where land is counted almost like prayer, repeated so often it becomes a creed. Acres, boundaries, river frontage, timber stands, cleared ground, bottomland, upland. Men speak these words with a softness usually reserved for poetry, which is almost funny until you remember what the poetry's doing. In Mississippi in 1850, land is not just dirt, it is promise, leverage, vanity, and a stage for power. The map itself seems restless, cut into parcels by surveyors, bought and sold by speculators, argued over in courthouse rooms that smell of paper, ink, boots, and stale tobacco. You can hear the scrape of chairs on wooden floors, the rustle of deeds being unfolded, the little throat-clearing sounds of men trying to appear honourable while calculating profit down to the acre. The land has already been transformed by force before you arrive. Forests have been cut back. Stumps rot at the edges of fields. Cane breaks and marshes are drained where possible. Roads are improved just enough for wagons and cotton bales to move. The smell is a blend of pine sap, damp clay, horse sweat, and fresh split wood. A plantation rarely appears all at once. It grows by stages, each new patch of cleared ground representing more labour, more ambition, and more pressure to make the numbers work. A man may begin with a few hundred acres and dream of doubling them. Another may inherit land and still complain as if the universe owes him additional counties. Status in this world rests on a careful performance. The planter class wants to look stable, polished, and inevitable. The main house is part of that performance, but so are the details around it. A carriage from a respected maker, a silver tea service, good horses, a daughter trained in music, a son sent to school, imported wallpaper, perhaps slightly peeling in summer humidity but still doing its best, books placed visibly, guests invited to dinner. The planter's wife, if she is present and healthy, may supervise the domestic sphere with a composed face while heat presses her dress against her skin. The host pours coffee, discusses weather and politics, and speaks of cotton as if he and the crop share a noble destiny. Money, though, is not always as solid as the columns on the porch. Beneath the polished manners sits a world of debt. Many planters borrow heavily to buy land, tools, livestock, and enslaved labourers. Credit runs through the system like a second river. A successful crop can make a man appear brilliant. A bad harvest, a flood, a drop in cotton prices, or a poorly timed expansion can leave him anxious enough to stare at his ledger by lamplight until midnight. You can almost smell the lamp oil, see the sweat at his temples, hear the scratch of the pen as he tries to convince himself that next season will set everything right. It is remarkable how often greed dresses itself as temporary necessity. Cotton links Mississippi to distant markets with startling intimacy. A bowl open in a hot field may end up as cloth in a northern factory or in British mills hungry for raw fibre. That international demand helps explain the obsession. Cotton is not merely a local crop. It is the engine of a global trade network, and Mississippi planters know it. They follow prices in newspapers. They discuss shipment delays. They complain about freight charges. Riverboats and ocean routes matter to men who may never see the sea. The mainstream historical fact at the heart of this world is simple and enormous. Cotton dominates Mississippi's economy in 1850 and ties the state directly to national and international finance. The quiet field and the noisy counting house belong to the same story. Inside planter culture, success depends on appearing effortless while managing constant strain. A wealthy planter may rise later than the field hands, eat a substantial breakfast, mount his horse, and ride out to inspect the work. His boots are polished. His shirt is cleaner than anything issued to the labourers. He expects greetings, deference, and immediate explanations if something looks wrong. Yet he is never entirely at ease. The crop must be watched. Labour must be controlled. Creditors must be satisfied. Neighbours must be impressed. Political allies must be cultivated. Power in Mississippi is social as much as economic. A man with cotton wealth can influence local courts, militia appointments, church standing, and elections. He may sit in the legislature or at least dine with those who do. Politics in this world taste of dust and whiskey. Men gather in town and speak with grand seriousness about states' rights, honour, tariffs, and the protection of their property. Property, of course, is the elegant little word carrying the ugliest burden. The defence of slavery is woven directly into political life. Mississippi's ruling class does not hide this commitment. It treats the ownership of human beings as the basis of liberty for white men, which is one of those arguments so twisted it almost collapses under its own weight. Almost, unfortunately, it remains sturdy enough to govern daily life. Courthouses, newspapers, and campaign speeches all help maintain the idea that the plantation order is natural, civilized, and essential. Religion often serves the same order, though not without tension. Churches may preach obedience, humility, and divine hierarchy. Plantation families like sermons that soothe the conscience and bless the existing arrangement. Sunday clothes come out, wagons roll, hymns drift into warm air, the smell of starch, perfume, sweat, and dust hangs around the churchyard. Yet religion does not behave perfectly. Biblical language can comfort the powerful, but it can also trouble them. Stories of bondage and deliverance linger in the same book. Ministers can urge submission, but they cannot stop listeners from noticing Pharaoh was not the hero. That must have been inconvenient. Women in planter households occupy a complicated place in this system. They may benefit from its wealth, help manage its routines, and reinforce its values, yet they also live within strict expectations of gentility, fertility, and emotional discipline. The ideal mistress of a plantation is supposed to be gracious, pious, hospitable, and above the uglier mechanics of coercion, reality is messier. She may oversee food stores, clothing distribution, nursing, laundry, and domestic assignments. She may discipline servants directly. She may resent the isolation of plantation life, fear illness, and bury children in family plots under live oaks. Silk gowns and sorrow can coexist quite comfortably in the South. The culture knows how to make room for both. Children of planter families are raised inside this arrangement until it feels ordinary. A boy may learn riding, shooting, arithmetic, and command nearly at once. A girl may be taught music, needlework, household oversight, and social polish. Both grow up seeing enslaved people work around them every day, which shapes their sense of rank before they can fully name it. The touch of privilege becomes normal. Food appears, beds are made, horses are saddled, clothes are washed. The child may form attachments, affections even, while being trained never to question the ownership that structures those bonds. That is one of slavery's cruelest achievements. It teaches intimacy and domination in the same lesson. There are, of course, degrees within the planter class. Not every slaveholder is a grand magnate, and many white Mississippians own no enslaved people at all. Still, the largest planters set the cultural tone. Their houses host dances, dinners, card games, and business meetings. Candlelight glows on glassware, fiddles play, boots thump on porch boards, ice, when available, becomes a luxury worth admiring. In some households, guests may be offered strange little delicacies or local curiosities. One quirky tidbit from the broader plantation south is the popularity of mock turtle soup made from calf's head, a dish that sounds like a prank played by a bored aristocrat but was considered respectable dining. The genteel table could be surprisingly weird. Even a leisure reflects hierarchy. Hunting trips, horse racing, and political talk offer white men arenas for display. A good horse matters, a strong drink matters, the right joke at the right dinner matters. Reputation floats through county society faster than river mist. A man who appears weak, careless, or financially unstable may find invitations cooling. He may also find credit tightening, which is far more serious than a missed party. So the performance continues. He smiles. He boasts modestly. He complains about labour discipline in a tone meant to suggest competence rather than failure. He insists the crop looks promising. He straightens his shoulders. He prays for market prices and good weather. The enslaved people on the plantation see all of this with more clarity than the planter class prefers. They know who is deep in debt, who drinks too much, who quarrels with neighbours, who has a temper sharpened by financial fear. They know which household runs on routine and which on chaos. Information travels through kitchens, stables, wash yards, ferry landings, and town errands. The plantation elite may imagine themselves unreadable, but power leaks. It always does. A slammed door, a delayed purchase, a harsh new order, a sale suddenly proposed. These signs are legible to the people whose lives can be altered by them overnight. Scholars continue to debate how secure the planter class truly felt beneath its grand style, because private letters often reveal anxiety, yet public behaviour insisted on confidence and control. That uncertainty gives the whole culture a strained quality. You can feel it in the way a host laughs too loudly, in the speed of a political argument, in the irritation caused by small inconveniences, a wet road, a sick mule, a missing tool, a late shipment. Nothing is small when the system is so expensive to maintain. The architecture itself participates in this nervous display. Wide porches create shade. High ceilings help hot air rise. Windows open for cross-ventilation. The house may look serene from a distance, but stand on the porch in July and you feel the heat anyway, thick as wool. Ceiling fans do not yet hum overhead. Relief comes from shade, hand fans, cold drinks if available, and the labour of others. The touch of the porch rail is warm under your palm. Cicadas scream from the trees. Dust settles on leaves. Somewhere out in the yard, chickens scratch in dry earth while a dog dozes under a wagon. The setting can seem almost sleepy. It is not. Town life and plantation life feed each other constantly. Natchez, Vicksburg, and smaller county seats act as centres of trade, gossip, law, and spectacle. Cotton bales stack near warehouses. Commission merchants handle sales. Lawyers draft contracts. Doctors make rounds. Tailors and shopkeepers serve the better families. Tavern doors open and close all evening. The smell near the river can be pungent. Mud, fish, rope, tar, manure, and sweet rot mingle together. Steamboat whistles cut through the air with theatrical confidence. They sound modern, energetic, almost triumphant. But those boats carry the wealth of plantations outward and bring luxury inward. Their music is part of the same arrangement. Mississippi in 1850 is often described by admirers as prosperous, refined, and destined for greatness. That language depends on selective eyesight. The prosperity rests on stolen labour. The refinement includes calculated violence. The greatness is measured in bales, acres, and banknotes while human beings live under threat of sale, whipping, and separation. Planter power reaches beyond the field into politics, law, religion, family, and taste. It shapes what houses look like, what newspapers praise, what boys are taught, what women are expected to hide, and what men call civilization. Once you see that, the whole landscape changes. The porch columns become less impressive. The silver loses some shine. The speeches sound rehearsed. Even the evenings carry this double quality. At sunset, the sky over Mississippi can turn copper and rose, with long bands of light stretching over the fields. The air cools slightly. Crickets begin. Lamps are lit in windows. A dinner bell rings. Somewhere a pianist touches a careful melody. Somewhere else a child in the quarters falls asleep to the smell of smoke and damp clothes. One world claims comfort, the other makes it possible. They occupy the same ground and breathe the same air, yet they are divided by force so complete that many white Mississippians scarcely admit the division as a moral problem at all. So you stand in this culture of land, money, and power, feeling the boards of the porch still warm from the day, and hearing distant voices fade into the thick evening air. The plantation elite wants permanence. It wants admiration. It wants history to remember elegant houses and successful crops. But beneath the polished image lies something raw and unstable. A society forever calculating, forever defending itself, forever dependent on the suffering it pretends not to see too clearly. That is the real splendour of Mississippi cotton society, if splendour is the word one insists on using. Costly, controlled, perfumed slightly with fear. You step away from the grand house and into the part of the plantation that tells the truth more plainly. The quarters sit on rough ground, usually arranged in a row or cluster, close enough for surveillance and far enough from the main house to preserve the planters' comfort. No landscape path leads here. No one boasts about the architecture. The cabins are practical in the meanest sense of the word, built fast, built cheaply, and built with the assumption that the people inside them deserve no softness beyond what keeps labour going. The dirt underfoot is packed hard by countless steps. It feels uneven, warm in places, cool in the shadows. Smoke drifts low from cooking fires. You smell ash, damp wood, old cloth, sweat, and the faint sweetness of cornmeal browning on an iron pot. A cabin may hold a family, though the word family has to work under impossible pressure here. Walls are often made of logs or rough planks, cracks let in drafts, insects, and gossip from outside. The roof may leak when Mississippi rain comes down in sheets. The floor might be bare earth or rough boards. Furnishings are sparse, a bedstead if the household is fortunate. Straw ticks, blankets of varying quality, pegs for hanging clothes, a stool or homemade bench, pots blackened by fire, gourd ladles, a few tools, a Bible perhaps, or pages remembered better than owned. Every object has weight because there are so few objects to spare. Inside one of these cabins, the air feels thicker than outside, warmed by fire, bodies, and poor ventilation. You hear breathing, a spoon against iron, a murmur from one corner, a child half asleep and not pleased about it. The touch of a blanket is rough. The touch of smoke clings to everything. In wet weather, the smell of mud creeps in and settles. In hot weather, the whole room can feel close and airless, with mosquitoes whining in the dark and sweat cooling slowly on the skin. Comfort exists here, but not because the plantation provides it. Comfort has to be made by hand, voice, memory, and stubbornness. The quarters are not just housing. They are the centre of enslaved social life, the place where people try to salvage kinship from a system designed to weaken it. A mother mends a shirt by firelight. A father smooths a child's hair with tired fingers. Older children mind younger ones while someone tends the pot. Neighbours exchange scraps of food, news, warnings, remedies, and jokes. A laugh may rise suddenly and die just as quickly. Not because joy is absent, but because everyone knows who might be listening. On some plantations, the cabins are placed deliberately so the overseer or owner can monitor movement. Physical space becomes a form of discipline. Even the layout has opinions about who should be trusted with privacy. Work does not end when field labour stops. That is one of the first hard truths you feel here. After sunset, there are clothes to wash, food to cook, children to settle, gardens to tend if daylight remains, tools to repair, feet to soak, cuts to clean, and bodies to coax into some condition fit for the next day. Women often carry a crushing share of this labour while also working in the fields. Men, too, face endless tasks beyond the gang labour of the day. The plantation extracts effort like a mill extracts juice from cane. Every hour is pressed. Every skill is noticed and used if it can increase output. The quarters also reveal how much the plantation depends on work that is not cotton picking. Someone must haul water. Someone must care for infants while mothers are in the field. Someone must feed livestock, chop wood, make soap, patch roofs, and mend shoes if there is leather enough to mend. On larger plantations, enslaved artisans are especially valuable. Blacksmiths, carpenters, coopers, drivers, and mechanics keep the place functioning. A blacksmith shop sounds different from the cabins. You hear iron struck on iron, the hiss of heated metal, the low rush of bellows. The smell is sharp with coal smoke and hot scale. The labour there is skilled, dangerous, and prized by owners who often congratulate themselves for recognizing talent they are simultaneously exploiting. Children grow up quickly in this environment because childhood itself is rationed. Very young children may remain near the cabins, watched by older women, grandparents, or anyone too old or injured for field work, but many begin contributing labour early. They carry water, scare birds from crops, sweep yards, gather kindling, or help with younger siblings. By adolescence, many are fully folded into plantation work. The system watches bodies with cold attention, measuring strength, obedience, and future value. That is not poetic language, it is economic language, and that is what makes it so ugly. A growing child is not simply loved by the owner. A growing child is appraised. Yet the quarters are also where culture deepens beyond the owner's reach. Songs emerge here, often low and rhythmic, shaped by work, prayer, memory, and coded feeling. Speech carries traces of different regions and African inheritances transformed under American slavery. Food traditions persist in altered form. Hair care matters, names matter, stories matter. A lullaby hummed in a Mississippi cabin may contain more history than the county courthouse. The plantation can seize labor and regulate movement, but it cannot fully flatten imagination. That failure on the part of power feels important. It is one of the few pleasant failures on the property. There are moments of tenderness in the quarters so quiet they are easy to miss. A hand pressing a cool cloth to a fevered forehead. Someone saving the better piece of bread for another. A shared joke over a cracked bowl. The slow braiding of hair at the end of a punishing day. The sound of a baby settling against a shoulder. These details matter because the plantation system thrives on abstraction. It wants categories like prime field hand, cook, child, old woman, driver. The quarters insist on actual people, tired people, irritated people, funny people, grieving people, generous people. Real people create a problem for every ideology built on ownership. The owner's view of the quarters is often transactional. Cabins must exist because labourers need to sleep somewhere. Rations must be distributed because workers must be fed enough to continue. Clothes must be issued because naked labour is impractical and socially embarrassing to the ruling class, which is somehow a greater concern than the labourer's comfort. Some owners boast about maintaining decent cabins or allowing small garden plots, as though minimal provisions erase coercion. The logic is grotesque. A man steals your life and then expects praise for handing you a blanket. One is tempted to call it generosity only if irony is allowed to do all the work. Rations commonly include cornmeal and pork, though the quality and quantity vary. Molasses, peas, sweet potatoes, or other staples may appear depending on the plantation and season. Gardens can supplement this food, and they matter greatly. Small patches near the quarters may produce greens, beans, or squash. The smell of fresh earth from these plots is different from the broad cotton fields. It is closer, more intimate, mixed with kitchen scraps and careful attention. A garden represents food, yes, but also a sliver of control, something chosen, something tended for your own household. Even that can be restricted or taxed by the owner's rules, but it remains meaningful. There is a quirky detail that surfaces in some accounts of plantation life, and it says a great deal about making beauty from very little. Enslaved children and adults sometimes fashion toys, cups, pipes, or little carved objects from clay, corn husks, scraps of wood, or bone. A doll made from rags might have charcoal marks for eyes. A toy animal might be cut with a pocket knife from discarded wood. These objects are small, humble, and easy for history to ignore. Still, they suggest creativity surviving in conditions designed to starve it. A child on a Mississippi plantation in 1850 might own almost nothing, yet someone still found a way to make play appear for a moment in the yard. Disease moves through the quarters with unsettling ease. Poor ventilation, crowded housing, weak diets, dirty water, and relentless labour make sickness hard to avoid. Coughs linger, fevers spread. Stomach illness can race through a cabin row. Malaria haunts low, wet country. Doctors may be called for valuable workers, but treatment is inconsistent and often crude. More commonly, healing falls to enslaved women and men who know herbs, poultices, teas, and practical methods learned through family and experience. The smell of pine, camphor, boiled roots, or steeped leaves may drift from a cabin where someone lies still under blankets. Official medicine and community knowledge overlap, collide, and sometimes contradict one another. Researchers still disagree about how much privacy enslaved families could create within the quarters, because plantation layouts varied and surviving descriptions often come from outsiders or hostile observers. That uncertainty matters when you stand here and try to imagine evening life. Some cabins may have allowed moments of relative quiet once darkness settled. Others were subject to frequent intrusion by overseers, patrols, or owners. Privacy in slavery is rarely absolute. It exists in degrees, in timings, in habits of looking and not looking. It may be found in a whisper, a glance, the pause before answering a question, the choice to speak outdoors instead of in. Sometimes privacy is less a place than a skill. Not everyone in the quarters belongs to one intact household. Sale, inheritance, migration, and forced movement tear family structures repeatedly. A husband may live on a neighbouring plantation and visit only when permitted. A child may have been sold away. A woman may mother children while fearing every season that one of them will be taken. These losses do not become less painful because they are common. Common pain is still pain. The remarkable thing is not that grief exists here. The remarkable thing is that love persists with such determination under conditions built to punish attachment. The quarters after dark can become a place of guarded sociability. People visit one another, exchange news from nearby plantations, discuss births, weddings, punishments, weather, and rumours of sale. A man returning from town work may bring scraps of information about cotton prices, political speeches, or boats on the river. A woman from the big house may know which planter family is quarrelling, which guest drank too much, or which mistress has taken ill. Information becomes a resource, not freedom, but something useful. Knowledge helps people anticipate danger and read the moods of power. You notice, as too, the drivers within the enslaved community, men placed in positions of responsibility over field gangs. Their role is difficult and often deeply painful, shaped by coercion from above and scrutiny from below. A driver may be expected to set pace, report problems, and enforce work expectations while living among the very people he must monitor. The tension in that position must have been exhausting. It is one more way the plantation tries to push its violence inward, turning survival itself into a complicated negotiation. Mainstream histories of slavery often focus on laws, markets, and famous speeches, but the quarters teach the daily mechanics better than any grand political statement. Here you see how slavery operates hour by hour through housing, rationing, fatigue, noise, surveillance, and dependence. The system is not merely a legal category. It is a lived environment. It shapes what you eat, where you sleep, how far you may walk, when you can speak softly, and whether your child's laughter makes you happy or worried that it may attract the wrong attention. Even with all that pressure, the quarters remain irreducibly human. Listen long enough and you hear a world that refuses total defeat. A woman hums while stirring a pot. A man taps mud from his shoes at the threshold. Someone whispers a prayer. Someone argues about nothing important and everything important. Someone tells a child a story involving animals cleverer than their hunters. The firelight catches faces, hands, the curve of a bowl, a patched sleeve, a sleeping foot uncovered from its blanket. Smoke curls upward. Crickets answer from the dark grass. The plantation sees cabins. The people inside them build a community out of scraps, memory, and will. So you stay in the quarters a little longer and let the place settle around you. The smell of ash and food, the creak of boards, the itch of heat trapped indoors, the softness of voices after hard labour. All of it reveals the plantation as it really is. Not a graceful estate, not a picturesque southern scene. A forced labour camp with cabins at its centre, where every ordinary act of family life becomes both necessary and quietly defiant. That is the harsh architecture of Mississippi cotton in 1850. Rough walls, thin blankets, heavy eyes. Human beings making life where the system offered only survival. You do not wake gently here. Morning arrives as an order. The darkness has barely loosened when sound begins moving across the plantation, sharp enough to enter your bones before your thoughts have formed. A horn may blow, a bell may ring. Sometimes it is a shout, plain and ugly, cutting through the damp air while the stars still linger over the fields. The noise means the same thing every time. Get up, move, now. Whatever dreams were passing through the cabins are dismissed without ceremony. Sleep is not a right here. It is a narrow gap between demands. The air before sunrise can be unexpectedly cool, especially near low ground where mist hangs over ditches and river edges. You feel moisture on your skin, the grass wet at your ankles, the boards under your feet slightly slick with night damp. Smoke begins to lift from cabin chimneys in thin, uneven streams. Someone stirs ashes and coaxes flame back to life. Someone else fumbles with a tin cup or an iron pot. Children murmur, not yet ready to be awake, which makes them no different from anyone else on the plantation, except that adults have already learned not to complain out loud. A rooster calls from somewhere near the yard. A mule stamps and rattles a trace chain. Frogs continue for a little while, then fade as the sky lightens. The first task is simple and exhausting at once. You must get yourself ready while half asleep. A shirt pulled on in haste, a skirt tied, shoes searched for or abandoned if none remain usable, hair covered or gathered back. The fabric against the skin feels cold for a moment, then damp as the body warms. Water for washing, if there is time and enough of it, is brisk and sometimes muddy, taken from a bucket that has already served several purposes. Breakfast is quick because lingering is dangerous. Cornbread, mush, cold leftovers, maybe a little fat or molasses if fortune has been unusually charitable. The smell of hot meal in the dark is comforting and painful in the same breath, because it never lasts. By the time the eastern sky turns from black to blue-grey, the workday is already gathering shape. People move from the cabins into the yard and then toward the fields in a flow that looks orderly from a distance and feels weary from within. Tools are lifted, baskets are carried, infants may be handed to older caretakers. Younger children trail sleepily until the demands of the day claim them too. There is very little wasted motion, not because everyone is energized by dawn, which would be a strange conclusion, but because the system punishes delay. Plantation time is strict in the morning. The owner or overseer wants bodies in place as early as possible, before heat grows severe and before any precious daylight escapes. Cotton work changes with the season, so the morning tasks depend on the calendar. In spring and early summer, there is planting, hoeing, thinning, and weeding. In late summer and autumn, the great ordeal of picking intensifies, but no matter the season, daybreak has the same emotional texture. It is the moment when the body understands what the mind would rather avoid. You feel it in the heaviness of the limbs, in the small groan of a knee straightening, in the dry mouth, in the instinctive wish for another hour that never comes, day after day. The plantation teaches the body to rise before it is repaired. The fields at dawn carry a beauty that makes the whole business harder to bear. Light spreads low across the rows, dew shines on leaves, birds move through the trees at the edges. The smell of wet soil rises with a freshness almost clean enough to deceive. A pink line appears on the horizon. Mist drifts in strips over the ground. For a moment the place seems calm, even kind. Then the labour begins in earnest, and the illusion collapses. Hands go to work, backs bend. The first spoken exchanges are practical, brief, and tired. Beauty remains, but it becomes irrelevant once the pace is set. On many plantations, field hands are arranged in gangs under supervision. The strongest adults set a pace others must follow. Drivers and overseers keep order by watching, urging, threatening, and sometimes punishing. If hoeing, the rhythm is relentless. Swing, pull, step, swing, pull, step. Dirt loosens around the plants. Weeds are cut down before they rob the crop. If planting, hands work row after row, dropping seed, covering it, moving on. If picking, fingers dart into open bowls, avoiding the sharp edges that can scratch and cut. Cotton itself looks soft, but the plant has a mean little honesty to it. It does not let the hand forget the work. A mainstream historical reality anchors this whole scene. Enslaved labor on Mississippi cotton plantations was organized from sunrise to sunset, with the workday stretching to the limits of available daylight, and sometimes beyond it during peak seasons. That statement can sit blandly in a textbook, but here it is visceral. Sunrise is not a poetic marker. It is the starting gun for pain, discipline, and endurance. Sunset is not romance. It is simply when one category of labour gives way to another. The overseer often appears early, mounted if the plantation is large enough to justify constant riding. You hear hoofbeats on hard ground, the jingle of tack, the short commands given without warmth. He watches for slow movement, uneven rows, poor spacing, inattentive hands. His presence changes the field's atmosphere in an instant. Conversation shrinks. Bodies tighten. Even those accustomed to his patrol feel the pressure when he nears. A horse gives a supervisor height, speed, and theatre, all of which help produce obedience. It is one thing to be watched by a man on foot. It is another to see him circling above the rows like a moving threat. Morning can also bring work in and around the big house. Domestic servants rise early to light fires, fetch water, prepare breakfast, polish surfaces, dress children, open shutters, and set the day in order for the planter family. The kitchen glows before dawn, hotter than the outdoor air, full of firelight, steam, and haste. You smell coffee, bacon grease, flour, soap, and smoke. Pots clatter. Feet cross the floor quickly. A mistress may still be asleep while the labour required for her comfort is already several hours old. That is one of slavery's little tricks. It hides work beneath other people's ease. For mothers with very young children, the start of day can feel especially cruel. A baby has to be fed, soothed, or handed off before the field bell fully claims the morning. The touch of a child leaving your arms at dawn must have stayed in the body long after the hands return to work. Care is compressed into minutes. Instructions are passed quickly to an older woman or a sibling. Come back if you can. Keep him shaded. Watch her cough. The work gang moves. A mother looks back only if she dares. Then the rows take her. Children old enough to contribute begin learning the plantation schedule long before they understand the system in full. They may carry water to workers, shoe livestock, collect chips for fuel, or assist with household chores. The lesson is constant. Morning belongs to labour. Your body is not your own clock. It belongs to the crop, the overseer, the season, and the ledger. This education is delivered not through speeches, but through repetition. Wake. Move. Work. Repeat. A regime does not need eloquence if it has enough mornings. Breakfast for the planter family offers a revealing contrast. In the main house, one might find coffee, biscuits, ham, preserves, airs, and conversation about weather, visitors, or politics. The tablecloth is laid straight. Chairs are sturdy. Silver glints. The smell is rich and warm. Outside, field hands begin the day on far less, and the difference in food alone tells a story about rank. It is tempting to call that contrast hypocrisy, though hypocrisy implies shame. Many planters saw no contradiction at all. They considered comfort their due and deprivation someone else's condition. Moral blindness often has very polished manners. There is a quirky little detail hidden in morning routines that says much about plantation culture. Some planters prized the punctuality of the first field horn so much that they compared it to military order, as if a cotton plantation were a noble regiment rather than a forced labour camp. The comparison flattered white male pride. Naturally. It also reveals how much the ruling class admired discipline for others while enjoying leisure for themselves. Nothing says civilization quite like making half the population wake in darkness so the other half can discuss honour over hot coffee. As the sun rises higher, the coolness leaves fast. Mississippi heat does not always announce itself dramatically. It gathers, the back of the neck warms, the shirt begins to cling, dust sticks to damp skin, dew turns to steam in the low places, insects become more insistent, gnats hover at the eyes. Mosquitoes linger where water stands. The smell of crushed plants and warming soil thickens. A field that seemed almost silver in first light now turns bright, green, and demanding. Shadows shorten. The day starts showing its teeth. Food and rest during the morning are limited and carefully structured. There may be a short break, but not enough to restore strength. A drink of water, perhaps warm from the bucket, a bite saved from dawn, a brief straightening of the back while the overseer looks elsewhere. Then the motion resumes. Some workers develop ways of conserving energy through rhythm, breath, and efficient movement. Experience teaches where to place the feet, How to shift the basket. How to avoid wasting steps. Endurance becomes a craft forced upon the body. It is practical knowledge purchased at too high a price. Writers and historians still dispute how much variation existed from plantation to plantation in the exact timing of the morning start, because records differ and memory bends under trauma, weather, and local custom. Yet there is no serious doubt about the larger truth. The day began brutally early, and the structure of dawn served the plantation's hunger for every possible hour of labour. That uncertainty about minutes does not soften the certainty about the system. The emotional landscape of morning is complex. Exhaustion is obvious, but it is not the only feeling present. There can be dread, certainly, especially if someone expects punishment or knows a child is ill. There can be irritation that flashes into whispered humour. There can be a numbness that settles like a second skin. There can also be determination. You see it in the way someone ties a headscarf firmly, lifts a basket with practised arms, or offers one quick look of care to another person before the work line forms. Even in coerced routine, dignity appears in posture, in efficiency, in the refusal to collapse inward. Sound becomes the soundtrack of dawn, labour, metal striking stone, hose cutting soil, cotton baskets dragging softly across the ground, birds calling from the tree line, a horse snorting, the overseer's voice, never improved by repetition, someone humming under the breath for steadiness, someone coughing, the creak of a leather harness from a wagon moving supplies, a child crying near the cabins. All of it blends into a rhythm that is neither silence nor speech. A plantation morning choir arranged by force and fatigue. Touch matters too. Splinters from a tool handle, rough cloth at the shoulder, a basket strap rubbing skin, damp earth at the heel, sweat running down the spine, the slight sting from a cotton burr. These physical details shape memory. Great systems are often remembered through small sensations. Not the abstract concept of oppression, but the cold shirt at dawn, the ache in the wrist, the smell of wet wood smoke before sunrise, the soreness that never fully leaves the back. As full daylight takes hold, the day becomes less about beginning and more about lasting. Dawn is only the opening demand. It clears the throat for all the hours that follow. Yet that opening matters because it reveals the plantation's logic in its purest form. Take people from sleep before they are ready, feed them just enough, place them under watch, turn beauty into labour, turn time into profit. Repeat so often that the routine looks normal to those who benefit. That is how a cotton morning in Mississippi 1850 truly works. So you remain in the first light a little longer and feel the entire system leaning into the sunrise. The fields brighten. The cabins empty. Smoke thins into the growing day. The bell or horn has long since finished sounding, but its command still hangs in the air, carried now by every bent back and hurried step. Morning here is not renewal, it is requisition. The day takes hold of the body before the sun fully clears the horizon, and from that moment onward, the plantation counts every movement as if it owns time itself. You stand in the cotton field when the picking season is in full command, and the crop no longer looks delicate. It looks greedy. The white bolls have burst open across the plants, bright against the darker leaves, and from a distance the rows appear almost festive, as if the land has dressed itself for some cheerful occasion. Up close, that illusion fades quickly. The plants catch at sleeves, their dry husks scratch the fingers, the baskets drag at the shoulder and hip. The soft fibre that seems so harmless in cloth begins here as a daily test of speed, endurance, and pain. Cotton has a talent for appearing innocent while making misery look ordinary. The work begins as soon as there is enough light to see clearly. Each person takes a long sack or basket, often slung over the shoulder, and starts moving down a row. The hands learn a harsh sort of choreography. Reach into the burr, twist, pull, drop the cotton into the sack, step forward, reach again, repeat until the movement replaces thought. The touch is constant. Dry shell against knuckles, fluff against palm, occasional sting when a burr catches the skin, fine dust settling at the wrists. The work demands speed, but the plant refuses to cooperate fully. it gives with resistance, which is a rather cruel quality in a crop that will later be praised for softness. The field sounds different during picking season. Instead of the repetitive scrape of hoes, you hear sacks brushing leaves, feet pressing dry ground, the rustle of cotton being torn free, and the muttered voices of workers gauging pace. A wagon might creak in the distance. An overseer's horse shifts and snorts at the edge of the rows. Sometimes there is no need for shouting because the arithmetic of fear has already been explained. Everyone knows the weight expected by the end of the day. Everyone knows that too little cotton in the sack may lead to punishment, shame, or both. That weighing is the centre of the day's tension. Picking is not simply labour, it is measurement. Cotton is gathered, carried, and then weighed to judge whether a person has met the required amount. Quotas vary by plantation, season, age, and the owner's appetite for cruelty, which is to say they vary a great deal, but the principle remains constant. You are not just asked to work hard, you are made into a number. How many pounds today? How many yesterday? Why less than last week? Why slower than the person in the next row? The scale becomes a judge that never considers hunger, illness, bleeding fingers, poor sleep, or grief. It wants weight. The owner wants more. This is one of the grim mainstream facts of cotton slavery in Mississippi. By the mid-19th century, enslaved pickers were often assigned daily quotas, and their output was carefully weighed and recorded. Those figures mattered because planters and overseers used them to drive competition, punish shortfalls, and calculate profit with chilling precision. A ledger could make a day of human exhaustion look like an efficient column of useful numbers. One almost admires the boldness of the lie. Almost. As the morning advances, the sack grows heavier. At first it trails easily enough behind you, then it begins to tug. By midday it feels like a second body dragging at the shoulder. The strap rubs the skin raw through thin cloth. The lower back tightens. The neck grows sore from the uneven pull. Fingers become stiff and tender, especially when the bowls are dry and sharp. Cotton fibres cling to sweat on the forearms and face. Dust hangs in the air under the sun. The smell of the field changes too. Early freshness burns away, replaced by hot leaves, dry earth, human sweat, and the faint bitter scent of bruised plant matter. There is a rhythm to picking, though not a pleasant one. Skilled hands move quickly and with surprising economy. A practiced picker knows how to strip a plant clean with minimal wasted motion. Children and older people may be assigned smaller expectations. Yet even those can be punishing. The field rewards dexterity and stamina, not comfort. Every pause costs time, every slowed movement becomes visible when the day's weight is measured later. Speed is survival, though never complete safety. The quota is a moving target on some plantations, raised whenever workers begin meeting it too well. Meet the demand and the reward may simply be a higher demand tomorrow. Efficient cruelty always admires itself for innovation. Midday offers little relief. There may be a short break for food, perhaps a bit of bread or meal, some meat if available, a drink from a water bucket now warm under the sun. People sink down briefly in the shade if any can be found. The touch of sitting still feels almost luxurious for a minute, then dangerous because the body stiffens. Rising again is its own punishment. Muscles protest. Fingers curl unwillingly before reopening. Someone wipes sweat with the back of a wrist and leaves a pale streak of cotton lint on the forehead. A few words may pass. A glance. A joke dry enough to survive the heat. Then the work resumes because the scale is still waiting. The overseer's role during picking season grows especially severe. He tracks pace, checks sacks, watches for hidden cotton, and keeps a close eye on anyone who appears to be lagging. Some patrol on horseback so they can survey multiple rows quickly. Others walk, which is somehow worse because their nearness feels more personal. Punishment can be threatened all day and delivered in the evening after weighing. That uncertainty hangs over every motion. A person who knows the sack is light by late afternoon works with a different kind of desperation. The field sees it. The body feels it. Even the way the hand reaches changes when fear enters the fingers. Punishment on cotton plantations serves more than one purpose. It is meant to enforce labour, terrify witnesses, and remind everyone that quotas are not suggestions. Whipping remains the most notorious form, but not the only one. People may be denied privileges, deprived of food, overworked further, humiliated publicly, or threatened with sale. The possibility of being sold away from family often does work before any lash is lifted. Terror can be economical that way. It leaves fewer marks on the ledger while achieving much the same obedience. There is something especially cold about the weighing itself. At day's end, workers bring in their sacks and wait while the cotton is measured. The scene is full of small humiliations. Cotton lifted, numbers called, names attached, comparisons made. The air near the scale may smell of dust, rope, wood, and evening sweat. The sun is lower by then, but the heat still clings to the ground. You hear the scrape of feet, the thump of cotton dropped down, the dull creak of the measuring apparatus. Sometimes the planter or overseer comments on a good yield with satisfaction, as though praising a machine that has finally justified its purchase. Nothing in that moment allows a person to remain simply human. Everything is reduced to output. The crop itself has odd little consequences that rarely appear in grand histories. Cotton lint has a way of drifting everywhere. It clings to eyelashes, sticks in hair, settles inside clothing, and floats through the gin house like strange indoor snow. Workers sometimes ended the day dusted with white fibres across arms and shoulders, as though the field had tried to mark them as part of the harvest. It is a quirky visual detail, but not a cheerful one. Even the body seems temporarily turned into an extension of the crop. Children in the picking fields face their own brutal logic. Small hands can be useful, and owners notice usefulness with indecent enthusiasm. A child who picks well may earn harsher expectations sooner. A child who struggles may be scolded, struck, or used as an example. There is no safe performance. Skill invites more pressure. Weakness invites punishment. That is one of slavery's most efficient mechanisms. It makes growth itself dangerous. To become stronger is to become more valuable to the system. To remain fragile is to be more vulnerable within it. Women often carry the same picking burdens as men, while also managing the afterlife of the day once the field ends. Pregnancy does not necessarily remove them from labour. Nursing mothers may be forced back to the rows quickly. Illness, menstruation, injury, and grief receive little accommodation under the regime of weight and quotas. The field does not recognise complexity. It recognises cotton in the sack. That indifference to the body's actual condition is part of what makes the labour so harsh. The human frame is treated not as living tissue with limits, but as a device expected to produce. Historians continue to debate the exact pace at which picking expectations increased over time on different plantations, because records are uneven, and planters had every reason to portray their demands as reasonable. Yet there is broad agreement on the central truth. Cotton picking in the antebellum South was intensely measured work, and those measurements were bound tightly to coercion. Whether the quota on one plantation was this number or that number matters less than the fact that the scale ruled the evening and fear ruled the rows. The emotional atmosphere in the field changes hour by hour. Morning may begin with grim concentration. Midday brings fatigue edged with irritation. Late afternoon is often the hardest. The body is tiring, but the day's weight is still not enough. Shadows lengthen. Yet there is no comfort in that if the sack remains too light. Hands move faster from panic rather than strength. Fingers fumble. Bits of leaf and hull get mixed into the cotton and may be noticed later. The shoulder feels bruised where the sack has ridden all day. Dust dries at the throat. You stop thinking in sentences and start thinking in motions. Some workers find tiny ways to resist the field's demands. A hidden pause at the end of a row, a moment spent straightening longer than strictly necessary. A scrap of conversation carried low so the overseer cannot catch it. A little cotton left behind in a way that seems accidental. Resistance in such a setting is rarely dramatic. More often it is measured in seconds, glances, posture, and the refusal to surrender the whole interior self to the crop. The field wants total submission. It receives labour, but never perfect surrender. There is always something held back. A thought, a memory, a private bitterness polished sharp by repetition. By evening, the light changes from harsh white to amber, and for a brief moment the field becomes beautiful again in the most insulting way possible. The low sun catches the cotton and makes the rows glow. The air cools slightly, insects shift their song, birds pass overhead. If you did not know what the day had contained, you might imagine peace. But the sacks tell the truth. So do the bent backs, the slow steps, the hands rubbed raw from reaching into burr after burr. Beauty in a cotton field is rarely innocence. More often it is camouflage. After the weighing, the day's judgment is delivered. A person who meets the quota may escape immediate punishment, but not the certainty of doing it all again. A person who falls short may face consequences that stretch into the night. The plantation counts the day complete only when labour, measurement, and threat have all been properly combined. That combination is the real machinery of cotton wealth. The gin is only one machine, the scale is another. Fear is perhaps the most efficient of all, so you remain a moment beside the evening scale and watch as the numbers settle into the ledger. Cotton that was plucked one handful at a time now becomes profit in someone else's imagination. A sack emptied, a weight recorded, a judgment made. Around you the field darkens by slow degrees. The smell of dust and sweat lingers in the cooling air. The last white bowls catch the sinking light. It would almost look gentle if you had not seen what softness costs here. But you have. You know now that on a Mississippi plantation in 1850, cotton is not merely grown. It is extracted through measurement, enforced by punishment, and carried every day on aching shoulders until the body itself feels weighed and found wanting. You begin to notice that the plantation does not burden everyone in exactly the same way. Its cruelty is shared, but never evenly. A Mississippi cotton plantation in 1850 divides labour by age, sex, strength, skill, and usefulness as defined by ownership. That division is cold and practical, yet life within it remains complicated because people are not categories. No matter how often the ledger tries to flatten them, women, men, and children all endure the system together, but each carries particular demands that shape the rhythm of the day, the body, and the private forms of survival that make another sunrise possible. For women, the work begins before the field and continues after it. A woman may rise in darkness, prepare food, wash a child, tie a headscarf, and hurry to the rows with almost no time left for herself. In the field she hoes, picks, carries, bends, and endures the same heat, insects, and quotas that press on men. Yet the day does not release her when the work gang returns. There may still be clothes to mend, water to fetch, children to settle, and food to prepare from whatever rational garden produce is available. The body is expected to be infinitely reusable. That expectation is one of slavery's most ruthless habits. The touch of work on women's lives is constant and physical, fingers cracked from washing, wrists sore from lifting, feet tender from long walking in poor shoes or none at all, shoulders rubbed raw by sacks during picking season, skin damp from kitchen heat before the sun has even cleared the trees, hair smelling of smoke because smoke is everywhere. A woman on a plantation carries labour in her muscles and in her planning. She must think ahead while exhausted, judging how long meal scraps will last, which child is coughing badly, whether cloth can be patched one more time, whether someone's fever looks dangerous, whether the overseer seems in a mood to notice anything at all. Motherhood under slavery is its own special cruelty because care must be given under permanent threat. A mother loves children who are legally not hers. That sentence remains shocking even when repeated because it should remain shocking. The law recognises the owner's claim and not the mother's right. Children can be sold, hired out, gifted, or inherited. Even before that horror becomes reality, its possibility shapes daily affection. A mother feeds, comforts, and warns while knowing the future may be decided by debt, spite, or convenience. Love under such conditions is not softer, it is fiercer, because it knows exactly what it is up against. Pregnancy does not remove women from the plantation's demands. Some may receive lighter tasks for a time, depending on the owner's calculations. but many continue heavy labour well into pregnancy and return quickly after childbirth. The field does not pause for the body's deeper needs. There is no benevolent respect for recovery. There is only the crop and the owner's estimate of how soon a woman can be made useful again. Historians widely agree that enslaved women were expected to serve both as workers and as reproducers of future labourers, which reveals the system's double claim on their bodies: labour in the present, profit imagined in the future. It is impossible to hear that without feeling the chill beneath the arithmetic. Men on the plantation face crushing expectations of another sort. Field labour is often organised around assumptions of masculine strength, especially for the hardest outdoor tasks: hauling, ditching, clearing, ploughing, and heavy picking. Men may also be assigned skilled jobs such as blacksmithing, carpentry, driving wagons, or serving as drivers in the fields. These roles can carry slightly different routines and a little more movement across the plantation, but they also come with pressure, scrutiny, and the danger of being used to enforce the owner's will upon others. A man valued for strength or skill is not protected by that value. He has simply worked through it. There is also the emotional burden carried by fathers and husbands whose ability to protect their families is deliberately undermined. A man may want to defend a wife from insult or a child from punishment, yet open resistance can bring devastating retaliation. The system attacks dignity by forcing impossible calculations: speak and risk everyone, stay silent and carry the humiliation inward. Some men manage to carve out authority within family life through teaching, humour, storytelling, prayer, craft, or sheer steadiness. Others are damaged by the constant denial of recognised manhood within a white society that prizes male control above nearly everything else. The plantation knows precisely what it is doing when it grants responsibility, but strips legal power. Children learn the system in stages, though not gently. At first they may remain near the quarters, watched by older women, elders, or older siblings. They absorb the daily sounds of plantation life before understanding the laws behind it. The morning horn, the evening footsteps, the smell of sweat and smoke, the adults' tired silences, all of this becomes ordinary long before it is fully interpreted. Then small tasks begin. Carry this, watch that, fetch water, mind the baby, gather chips for the fire, scare birds from the garden. Work enters childhood not as an event but as a slow encirclement. As children grow, their value to the plantation increases in visible ways. Owners and overseers watch bodies with alarming attention: height, quickness, strength, obedience, skill with hands, all are noticed. A child who learns fast may be praised in the same tone one might use for a promising mule, which rather destroys the compliment. A girl may be drawn into spinning, sewing, nursing smaller children, field work, or service near the house. A boy may move toward field gangs, livestock care, errands, hauling, or skilled apprenticeships if the plantation has use for them. Childhood narrows, expectation widens. A curious little detail in accounts of plantation life is how often children made games out of scraps from the labour system itself. Corn cobs became playthings, bits of rag became dolls, sticks became animals or wagons in dusty yards. Songs and clapping games turned rhythm into brief delight. It is a quirky, moving reminder that children remain children even in brutal settings. They invent play where almost nothing is provided. A game in the dirt beside a cabin does not erase slavery. It reveals how stubborn life can be inside it. Women often sustain the inner life of the quarters through food, healing, memory, and social care. They know who needs broth, who has clean cloth left, which herb may ease a cough, which story quiets a frightened child. This knowledge is practical and communal. It keeps people going. It can also give women forms of influence not acknowledged in the plantation hierarchy, but deeply important within enslaved society. A woman who can heal, midwife, calm, organise, or advise carries a kind of authority shaped by trust rather than ownership. The plantation counts labour by pounds and hours. Communities count value differently, meant to create forms of support that do not fit the planter's tidy categories. A father teaches a child how to set a trap. A husband repairs a leaking roof after dark. A skilled worker carves a stool for a cabin or mends a tool needed by a neighbour. Someone tells stories in a low voice after supper. Someone sings a line that makes another person smile despite the day. These gestures are not grand acts of resistance in the heroic storybook sense. They are survival in its most durable form. They make family life possible when the system constantly tries to reduce people to isolated labour units. Scholars still disagree about how far white planters understood the strength of enslaved family bonds, because some records suggest owners recognize those bonds as useful for stability, while others show shocking indifference to separation. The uncertainty is revealing. Whether or not individual owners understood those ties emotionally, they certainly exploited them when convenient and shattered them when profitable. Family was tolerated only so long as it did not interfere with control. That is not recognition. It is conditional permission under threat. The sounds around women, men, and children differ throughout the day. In the quarters at dawn, a mother hushes a baby while tying her own clothing. In the field, men answer tool against soil or basket against cotton. At midday, children's voices rise near the cabins, briefly freer than adult voices in the rows. By evening, a father's murmur may mingle with a pot lid rattling on the fire. The plantation is full of overlapping soundscapes of labour and care, none of them accidental. You hear social history not in declarations, but in these repeated noises, the ordinary music of people forced to improvise life under pressure. Smell carries this division too. The field means hot leaves, earth, sweat, dust. The wash area brings lye soap, damp cloth, and river water. The kitchen means cornmeal, pork fat, smoke, and sometimes the sharper scent of greens or onions. The nursery corner of a cabin carries milk, straw, and the warm smell of sleeping children. A blacksmith's space smells of metal and fire. A sick room smells of boiled herbs, stale blankets, and worry. Each role in plantation life has its own atmosphere. Together they form a map of unequal burdens. Touch can tell the story even faster. A child's hand rough from chores earlier than it should be. A woman's palm burned from lifting iron pots. A man's shoulders knotted from carrying sacks or swinging an axe. A baby passed from arm to arm because the workday has no space for pauses. Cloth worn thin at the elbows. Feet calloused from years on hard ground. These are not poetic details added for colour. They are the physical record of who carried what within the plantation order. There is another harsh difference to notice. White society often judged enslaved women and men by impossible moral standards, while denying them the conditions needed for stability. A father criticised for failing to provide in a system that confiscates his labour. A mother judged for children left with others while she is forced into the field. Children scolded for noise in quarters too crowded for peace. The injustice is not only material, it is interpretive. The system creates damage and then pretends the damage reveals character, yet people persist in shaping family meaning anyway. Marriage may not have legal protection, but couples form unions recognized by their communities. Parents name children carefully. Elders teach manners, warnings, beliefs, recipes, prayers, and songs. Stories about animals, tricksters, scripture. And ancestors move through the cabins after dark. Memory becomes inheritance when property cannot. A child may not receive land or legal security, but may receive a song, a warning, a way of braiding hair, a phrase to say when afraid, a sense of belonging to more than the owner's inventory. That kind of inheritance matters precisely because the plantation cannot issue it. By looking closely at women, men, and children, you see slavery with sharper focus. It is not a single weight placed evenly across a crowd. It is a system that exploits every stage of life differently, and then binds those exploitations together. It takes women's labour and motherhood. It takes men's strength and tries to humiliate their care. It takes children's growing years and trains them towards service before they can choose anything at all. That layered cruelty is part of what made cotton plantations so effective and so devastating. So you remain among these households and watch how survival is assembled from unequal burdens. A woman bends over a pot while listening for a child's cough. A man knots a rope or smooths a board by fading light. A child dozes against a tired shoulder, then wakes just enough to hear a soft voice nearby. Smoke hangs in the evening air. Crickets begin in the grass. The plantation still claims ownership of the ground, the labour, the schedule, and the law. But in these shared acts of care, however strained and incomplete, you see people refusing to become only what the system says they are. That refusal does not remove suffering. It simply makes humanity visible inside it. You can tell a great deal about a plantation by what it feeds people, what it lets them wear, and what it does when they fall ill. These details seem humble at first. A ration of cornmeal, a pair of shoes, a spoonful of syrup, a blanket too thin for winter, a fever left too long. Yet this is where the system becomes unmistakably physical. Cotton wealth may glitter in public, but daily life in the quarters is measured by hunger, rough fabric, and the body's stubborn battle with sickness. There is nothing abstract about any of it. A stomach growls, a shirt scratches, a cough lingers through the night. The harsh reality of Mississippi in 1850 lives in those ordinary miseries as much as in any whip or ledger. Food begins with rations, and rations are almost always calculated with economy rather than care. Cornmeal appears again and again because it is cheap, filling, and versatile. Pork, often salt pork, may be issued in set amounts. Molasses may sometimes appear, peas, sweet potatoes, or other staples vary by plantation and season. The smell of these foods cooking is familiar and plain. Smoke, grease, meal, and steam. It can be comforting because it means something warm is on the fire. It can also be dispiriting because the menu repeats with the steady imagination of punishment. A plantation does not ask what people might enjoy eating. It asks what will keep labour moving at the lowest cost. The quality of the food matters as much as the quantity. Salt meat can be tough, fatty, or rancid. Cornmeal can be coarse and dull. Fresh vegetables may be scarce unless gardens or extra effort provide them. Water can be muddy or warm. A person may go to sleep with enough in the stomach to avoid collapse, yet not enough to feel genuinely nourished. There is a difference between being fed and being sustained. The plantation usually aims for the first while pretending it has accomplished the second. Hunger remains a regular companion, sometimes quiet, sometimes sharp. It shapes mood, strength, and every bit of patience left by the end of the day. Gardens become precious for this reason. A small patch near the quarters can transform survival. Greens, beans, onions, squash, peas, and herbs add flavour, colour, and actual nutrition that rations alone often fail to provide. The smell of turned garden soil is richer than the wide field soil, closer and more human, mixed with kitchen scraps, ashes, and intention. A garden is labour, of course, added to an already overworked life, but it is labour with a different emotional weight. You tend it for your own household. You decide where to place the seeds. You know which child likes peas and which elder needs softer food. In a system built on confiscation, that small zone of choice matters. Fishing, trapping, and foraging can also supplement the diet where conditions allow. A creek may offer fish, woods may yield berries, nuts, greens, or small game. These sources of food are not guaranteed and often require time or access that the plantation tries to limit. Still, people find ways. A rabbit caught, a basket of greens gathered, a handful of persimmons. These can make the difference between bare maintenance and a meal with a little life in it. Survival under slavery often depends on these margins. Official provisions keep the system going. Unofficial skill keeps people going. There is a small but telling detail in food culture worth lingering over. Corn ash, created through an old process related to nixtamalization in some communities, could sometimes be used to alter corn preparations, improving texture and flavour where knowledge survived or adapted. It did not appear everywhere in the same way, but it reminds you that food was never merely ration and pot. Knowledge travelled through kitchens, cabins, and memory. Even with poor supplies, people worked techniques into meals that owners neither invented nor fully understood. A bowl of mush may still contain history. Clothing tells its own hard story. Plantation issue garments are often coarse, limited, and practical only from the owner's point of view. A shirt or dress may be made from rough Osnaburg or other inexpensive cloth. The fabric can feel stiff when new, scratchy at the neck, harsh under the arms, and heavy with sweat by noon. Trousers may wear thin at the knees. Dresses may be loose and durable but not comfortable. Children often make do with too little for too long because growth outpaces distribution. Clothes are patched, resawn, handed down, and worn until the cloth itself seems surprised to still be in service. Shoes are even more revealing. Some people receive brogans, heavy shoes with little grace and often poor fit. They pinch, rub, and wear awkwardly against the heel. Others go barefoot much of the year, especially children. The ground then becomes part of the body's daily experience, and hot dust, cold mud, thorny edges, splinters near the cabins, hard paths worn smooth by use. Bare feet toughen, but that toughness is not freedom. It is adaptation forced by scarcity. When winter comes, poor shoes or none at all turn the cold from discomfort into pain. Blankets and bedding rarely offer much relief. Straw ticks flatten quickly. Covers may be thin, torn or shared. A cabin in winter can admit wind through wall cracks and under doors, while summer turns the same space into a heated box full of mosquitoes. The touch of bedding after a day's work should be mercy. Often it is only partial truce. You lie down sore and wake sore. Rest helps, but the materials around you never quite allow the body to forget where it is. A basic historical truth sits right in the centre of this material world. Enslaved people on southern plantations were commonly provided only minimal rations and limited annual clothing allowances, and those provisions were often inadequate in quality and quantity for health and comfort. The mainstream record confirms what the cabins themselves make obvious. Mississippi cotton wealth did not translate into humane living standards for the labourers who generated it. Quite the opposite. Grandeur in one house often depended on shabby scarcity in another. Then there is sickness, which moves through plantation life with a grim familiarity. The body under slavery is overworked, underfed, and exposed to weather, insects, contaminated water, and overcrowded housing. That combination invites disease. Fevers pass from cabin to cabin. Coughs linger into dangerous weakness. Children suffer stomach ailments, skin infections, and respiratory illness. Adults face malaria, dysentery, influenza, and injuries that never heal properly because work resumes too soon. The sounds of sickness at night are unforgettable. A child wheezing in sleep, an adult coughing into cloth, someone turning restlessly on a straw tick, someone whispering a prayer over a hot forehead. Mississippi's environment can be especially punishing in this regard. Low wet ground breeds mosquitoes. Summer heat drains strength and spoils food faster. Winter damp works into the chest and joints. Water sources near quarters may not be clean. Latrines, where they exist, are often crude. Chickens, pigs, dogs, and people can be crowded into close relationship with mud and waste never far away. The smell after rain around the quarters can become thick with damp earth, refuse, smoke, and rot. You do not need a doctor's training to know illness will follow. The whole place smells like a warning. Medical care, when provided, is profoundly unequal. Owners may call a physician for valuable workers, pregnant women nearing delivery, or outbreaks threatening the labour force as a whole. But the quality of care varies widely, and much of 19th century medicine is crude, painful, or simply ineffective. Bleeding, purging, calomel, and harsh dosing can do as much harm as good. A doctor's bag may arrive with an air of authority and leave without much improvement. The plantation likes the appearance of care when labour value is at stake. Genuine compassion is less reliably distributed. In daily practice, healing often depends on enslaved knowledge. Women and men use roots, herbs, teas, poultices, steam, and careful observation learned from elders, kin, and local experience. Pine, sassafras, camphor, peppermint, willow, and many other remedies can enter the sick room in different forms depending on region and availability. The smell of boiled herbs and warmed cloth becomes part of the atmosphere around illness. Hands cool a face. Broth is coaxed into someone who does not wish to eat. A child is held upright through a coughing spell. This labour of nursing is constant, mostly unrecognised, and deeply skilled. Historians still debate how much planters trusted enslaved healers even while depending on them, because white records often dismissed African American medical knowledge in theory while relying on it in practice. That uncertainty tells you something important about power. It can be arrogant and dependent at the same time. An owner may claim mastery over the plantation while quietly needing the very expertise he refuses to honour. Fever does not care much for social hierarchy, and a good remedy is still a good remedy whether or not the owner approves of its source. Children and older people are particularly vulnerable in this landscape of food and sickness. A child weakened by poor nutrition can decline quickly after an ordinary illness. An older person already worn down by years of labour may never recover full strength from fever or injury. Yet even these fragile bodies remain tied to usefulness in the owner's mind. Someone too old for the field may still watch infants, shell peas, card wool, or sweep yards. Someone unwell may be pushed back to labour too early if the crop is pressing. Recovery is judged not by comfort but by whether the body can once again be turned toward work. There are also illnesses and injuries that leave no dramatic scene, only a slow wearing down. Sore backs become chronic pain. Bad teeth make eating difficult. Untreated cuts fester. Eyes weaken. Skin cracks in winter. Joints stiffen. Women may suffer through childbirth injuries or reproductive complications with little support. Men may carry strains from lifting and hauling for years. These are not spectacular events, which is why history can glide past them too easily. But a life can be made miserable more by accumulation than by a single catastrophe. The plantation understands accumulation very well. It uses it in labour. The body receives it in suffering. Clothing and sickness often meet in miserable ways. Damp garments worn too long chill the body at night. Thin clothes offer little protection in winter winds or sudden cold rains. Poor shoes invite sores and infections. Blankets that never fully dry carry odours and discomfort into sleep. A child with fever shivers under cloth that cannot quite warm him. An adult returns from the field soaked in sweat and has nothing clean or dry to change into. The senses record all of it: the clammy fabric, the smoky blanket, the stale air of a crowded cabin, the taste of weak broth on a sore throat. And still people create care from these poor materials. A mother saves the softer portion of a blanket for a child. A neighbour lends a less torn shirt. Someone trades a few garden greens for a bit of lard to strengthen a sick person. Someone sits up late mending clothes by a firelight because tomorrow's work cannot be done in rags that split further at first movement. Practical love fills the gaps left by calculated neglect. It does not solve the conditions. It simply keeps people alive inside them. By attending to food, clothing, and sickness, you see how slavery extends far beyond the field. It reaches into the mouth, the skin, the lungs, the stomach, the night. It decides how much warmth a person deserves, how much hunger is acceptable, how long a fever may last before someone bothers to notice. The plantation is not only a workplace, it is a regime of material deprivation organised to support cotton profits while preserving just enough labour strength to continue. So you stay a moment in the cabin while the fire settles low and the smell of meal and smoke hangs in the air. A patched shirt dries on a peg, a pot cools by the hearth. Someone coughs in the corner beneath a thin blanket. Someone else tears bread into smaller pieces so it will stretch. Outside, the night insects continue as if the world were balanced and ordinary. Inside, the truth is plainer. The body here is never far from want. Hunger presses. Cloth chafes. Illness waits. And yet people still feed one another, cover one another, and tend one another with a care the plantation never intended to supply. You begin to notice that obedience on a plantation is never as complete as the owner imagines. The rows may look orderly, the cabins quiet by night, the ledgers neat, the rules loudly repeated, but beneath that arrangement runs another current, quieter and harder to measure. Resistance in Mississippi cotton country rarely announces itself with trumpets. It survives in subtler forms, because the penalties for open rebellion are brutal and immediate. Yet the absence of dramatic revolt does not mean acceptance. It means people adapt their defiance to the shape of danger. They learn how to say no in ways the plantation cannot always catch at once. One of the simplest forms of resistance is slowness, not collapse, Not obvious refusal, just the quiet adjustment of pace. A hoe lifted with slightly less urgency. A trip to the water bucket stretched by a few breaths. A pause at the end of a row long enough to ease the spine. In a world ruled by output, even stolen seconds matter. They do not overturn the system. They do something smaller and still meaningful. They return a fragment of time to the person whose day has been claimed. The owner wants every movement counted. Resistance begins by making a few movements uncountable. Tools can participate in this quiet rebellion too. A handle loosened a bit more slowly than needed, a repair delayed, a mule harness adjusted with painstaking care that somehow consumes extra minutes, a wagon loaded correctly but not quickly. Enslaved workers understood the machinery of plantation labour better than the people who claimed to command it. That knowledge gave room for minor sabotage, often hidden inside ordinary wear and tear. A plantation depends on constant motion. Anything that interrupts that motion, even briefly, can become a small act of opposition disguised as inconvenience. Cotton itself offers opportunities. A picker might leave some cotton in the burr or gather less efficiently when surveillance weakens. A worker in the gin house might slow the pace without creating an obvious fault. Someone assigned to transport bales might take the less direct route or handle timing in ways that frustrate schedules. None of this is theatrical. That is precisely the point. The most durable resistance often wears the face of accident. Plantation authority knows this, which is why overseers grow so suspicious and irritable. They sense that labour can be coerced without ever becoming wholehearted. The field keeps producing, but not always with full cooperation. Speech becomes another refuge. Language on the plantation has layers. There is what one says directly to white authority, what one says among trusted companions, and what one says in coded or indirect ways that pass under hostile ears. A joke can carry more bitterness than a complaint. A song can contain warning, prayer, mockery, or endurance all at once. A remark that seems harmless to an overseer may draw knowing glances among those who hear the deeper meaning. Quiet talk in the quarters, by the well, near the wash area, or on the path back from the field helps turn information into protection. Information itself is a form of resistance. News travels along routes the planter class struggles to fully control. A person sent to town returns with rumours of prices, politics, patrols, sales, sickness, or trouble on neighbouring plantations. Someone from the big house hears arguments over debt or whispers about a coming journey. A hired-out worker learns which roads are watched and which ferries run at night. A woman visiting kin on a nearby place brings word of punishment there or a wedding here or an owner in financial distress. Knowledge is never freedom by itself, but it lets people prepare, interpret, and sometimes avoid danger before it lands. Religious life often shelters resistance in especially powerful ways. Official Christianity on plantations may be used by white ministers and owners to preach obedience, patience, and acceptance of earthly rank. Yet enslaved people also form their own religious practices, sometimes openly, often in guarded spaces. Prayer meetings in cabins, brush arbours, or wooded places beyond immediate sight offer more than devotion. They provide gathering, comfort, coded speech, and a moral universe in which Pharaoh is judged and deliverance remains imaginable. The sound of a low singing in the dark can be both soothing and subversive. Hope itself becomes a political problem for slavery. Spirituals and work songs are especially rich with layered meaning. A simple refrain can steady a group during labour, hide instruction in plain hearing, or express sorrow that cannot safely be spoken directly. Rhythm organises the body. Melody carries memory. The plantation may hear only music. The singers may hear grief, faith, mockery, or longing for escape. That dual hearing is its own triumph. One line may mean one thing to power, and another thing entirely to the people living beneath it. There is elegance in that sort of survival. Also, one suspects it would have annoyed many overseers deeply, which adds a slight sparkle. A quirky detail from plantation life helps show how communication could move quietly. In some places, people used everyday objects or ordinary domestic movements as subtle signals. The timing of a visit, the placement of a cloth, the choice to linger at a well, the route taken between cabins. Such acts were not formal codes everywhere, and historians must be careful about exaggerating them. But the broader point stands. On a watched landscape, ordinary behaviour becomes a language. The more normal it looks, the safer it can be. Running away is perhaps the most obvious form of resistance, though also one of the most dangerous. Some people flee only briefly, hiding in nearby woods or swamps for a few days to escape punishment, see loved ones, or assert a temporary refusal. Others attempt longer escapes toward towns, free states, or freer spaces within a hostile map. Mississippi's geography can both help and hinder. Rivers, swamps, dense woods, and long distances offer cover but also exposure, hunger, and risk. Patrols, dogs, advertisements, and local networks of white surveillance make every mile uncertain. Still, people run. That fact alone says everything necessary about whether slavery was bearable. Then there is resistance inside the household itself. A domestic worker may overhear more than the owner realizes and choose what to pass along or what to conceal. A cook may save a better portion for someone in the quarters. A nursemaid may protect a child not because the owner commands it, but because care grows where it will. A laundress may pocket a scrap of cloth. A seamstress may mend for her own community from leftover thread. These acts are small, practical, and morally clear. The plantation calls them theft or insolence. Another word for them is justice in miniature. Relationships also become sites of resistance. Enslaved people marry, parent, visit, court, celebrate, grieve, and maintain kin ties even when the law refuses to honour those bonds. To continue loving under such conditions is more defiant than it may first appear. The system depends on reducing people to labour units and saleable assets. Family insists on another truth. A husband walking miles at night for a visit, a mother saving a story for bedtime, grandparents teaching names and prayers. These acts preserve worlds the owner does not fully control. Affection becomes a refusal to accept the categories imposed by the ledger. Food, as always, enters the story. A hidden garden patch, extra greens gathered from a ditch bank, a chicken raised quietly, a handful of meal saved from one day to strengthen the next. All of this pushes back against the plantation's attempt to define the limits of survival. To feed yourself with skill outside the ration system is not merely practical. It is a declaration that the owner will not entirely dictate your body's terms. The smell of greens simmering from a private patch carries a different dignity than plantation-issue pork. It smells, at least faintly, like choice. Mainstream scholarship recognizes these forms of resistance clearly now. Enslaved people throughout the antebellum South resisted slavery in daily, varied, and often hidden ways, from work slowdowns and sabotage to running away, clandestine worship, and the maintenance of family and culture. That historical fact matters because older romantic stories of plantations often tried to confuse forced compliance with contentment. They were wrong. Silence under surveillance is not consent. Efficiency under threat is not loyalty. A person may survive by appearing compliant while thinking, planning, and quietly pushing back all the while. There is room here for uncertainty too. Historians still debate how often specific songs, signs, or religious gatherings carried direct escape instructions as opposed to more general spiritual or emotional meaning. The evidence is uneven, and memory can become embellished over generations. Yet the uncertainty does not weaken the larger truth. Even when a song did not literally map a road north, it could still map endurance, solidarity, and inward freedom. Not every hidden meaning needs to direct your feet. Some only need to steady your soul. Resistance can also appear in the preservation of style, gesture, and memory. Hair arranged with care after a long day. A recipe held in the mind. A naming pattern passed down. A proverb spoken to a child. A way of clapping, dancing, or telling a story that carries older inheritances into new misery without surrendering them. The plantation wants useful bodies. Culture keeps producing persons instead. That may sound soft compared with sabotage or escape, but it is not soft at all. It is one of the longest fights in the world. The landscape itself becomes part of the struggle. Woods offer concealment for meetings. Creeks provide routes and resources. The space between cabins can carry whispers after dark. The quarters, though watched, still hold corners where a glance says enough. You feel the atmosphere of such spaces differently. The air in a cabin prayer meeting is warm, close, alive with breath and murmured assent. The edge of the woods at night smells of wet leaves and bark, the darkness thick enough to hide fear and fellowship together. These places do not remove danger. They hold it in balance with human intention. No single act of quiet resistance destroys a plantation. That is the sober truth. But together, these acts erode the fantasy of total control. The owner can command labour, punish shortfalls, and write laws. He cannot prevent every hidden meeting, every coded remark, every act of mutual aid, every private prayer, every inward refusal. Slavery would have preferred complete possession. It never achieved it. Its power was vast, but never perfect. That imperfection matters. It is where human agency survives. So you listen closely as night settles over the Mississippi plantation. Somewhere a song rises, low enough not to travel too far, strong enough to steady the people who hear it. Somewhere a whispered warning changes tomorrow's choices. Somewhere a spoonful of food is passed quietly to someone weaker. Somewhere a man decides to walk to another plantation after dark to see his wife despite the danger. Somewhere a woman kneels in prayer and imagines judgment falling not on herself but on the system around her. None of it will appear proudly in the planter's records. None of it makes the cotton less heavy in the morning, but all of it matters. In a world built on forced labour and surveillance, these quiet refusals are how people defend the last territory. Slavery can never fully seize. You can follow cotton from the field to the river and still miss the most chilling market on the plantation, unless you look directly at the ledger. There, in the same neat hand that records bale counts and tool costs, you find people listed with prices beside them. That is the cold centre of the system. Cotton and human beings move through the same financial imagination. A good crop may increase a planter's reputation, but enslaved people themselves are also counted as capital, collateral, inheritance, and saleable property. In Mississippi in 1850, the Cotton Kingdom is not merely worked by slavery. It is financed through it, expanded through it, and constantly rearranged through the buying and selling of flesh. The domestic slave trade has already transformed Mississippi long before you arrive. As cotton agriculture spread westward and southward, traders moved large numbers of enslaved people from the Upper South into booming cotton states like Mississippi. Families from Virginia, Maryland, and the Carolinas could be sold downriver or overland into places they had never seen, toward plantations hungry for labour and investors hungry for return. The phrase sold south contains a whole geography of dread. It means roads, chains, steamboats, holding pens, strange accents, and the severing of ordinary life at someone else's convenience. A sale begins long before the moment of transfer. It begins in debt, ambition, inheritance disputes, estate settlements, or a planter's decision to enlarge operations. The reasons vary. The effect remains devastatingly familiar. A man studies his accounts and decides he needs cash. A creditor presses. A death in the family triggers distribution of property. A son receives a woman and her children as part of a settlement. A trader arrives with business-like cheerfulness. Suddenly human relationships are measured against financial need. The air in such moments must have felt charged even before any announcement was made. A little too much whispering. A horse in the yard. A visitor staying longer than expected. People on a plantation learn to read such signs because the consequences are life-changing. The sale itself may occur privately or through a larger market. Some people are sold directly from one planter to another. Others are sent to town, held temporarily, examined, advertised, and transferred through dealers. Markets in places linked to Mississippi commerce, especially New Orleans, form major hubs in this grim trade. Yet county seats and smaller local exchanges matter too. A person need not travel through a grand commercial centre to feel the full violence of commodification. A sale in a courthouse yard can destroy a family just as thoroughly as one beside a river warehouse. The sensory reality of the trade is hard to ignore once you stand close to it. You smell sweat, leather, Horse dung, damp wood, tobacco, and anxiety. Boots scrape on the rough boards. Men talk in low business tones that would sound almost ordinary if the subject were not a human life. Someone is told to turn around, open the mouth, flex an arm, walk a few paces. The language of evaluation is insulting in its calmness. Strong sound, breeding woman, good field hand, handy boy. The body's inspected like livestock, but with the added cruelty that the person inspected understands perfectly well what the words mean. Nothing in the market tries to preserve dignity. It only tries to preserve price. A central historical fact belongs here. By 1850, Mississippi's cotton expansion depended heavily on the domestic slave trade, which forcibly relocated enslaved people into the state to meet labor demand on plantations. That movement of people was not incidental. It was one of the engines of plantation growth. Cotton profits encouraged purchases, and the expectation of future cotton profits supported further buying. In plain terms, the market in human beings and the market in cotton reinforced each other continuously. One made the other larger. Families suffer most visibly under this system of sale, because family ties mean little when weighed against debt or ambition. A husband may be owned by one man and his wife by another. Children may belong legally to the owner of their mother and still be sold separately when older. Siblings can be split between heirs. A mother can wake one day with the ordinary burden of work and go to sleep that night knowing a child has been sent away. Such separations are not rare misfortunes. They are part of slavery's structure. Their frequency does not make them less devastating. It simply means the pain becomes widespread enough to seem almost atmospheric. The trade also reshapes emotions on the plantation long before any sale occurs. Fear of sale hangs over behavior, conversations, and relationships. It is used as punishment, warning, and control. An owner need not always whip if he can threaten separation. The mere possibility that a child could be sold, or a husband sent away, or an aging parent disposed of, disciplines the imagination itself. People become cautious in love not because they feel less, but because feeling deeply in a saleable world carries constant risk. That is a terrible burden to place on ordinary affection. Slavery places it anyway. Children experience the market in particularly brutal ways because they often understand enough to fear it without having the power to interpret adult decisions fully. A strange white man in the yard, a mother speaking too softly, extra crying at night, a bundle packed in haste. These signs can settle into the memory before the event itself is fully understood. For older children, the danger is obvious. They know they may be valued increasingly as labourers. Growth makes them more vulnerable to sale, not less. A child becoming tall and capable would be good news in a humane society. Here it can attract attention from buyers. Women face additional terrors in the marketplace. Their labour, domestic skills, and childbearing capacity may all be assessed with chilling frankness. Young women are especially vulnerable to sexual exploitation, both before and after sale, yet such realities are often under-described in planter records because the records are written to protect the respectability of the people doing the exploiting. Silence in the archive does not mean safety in life. It usually means the powerful were writing. You do not need much imagination to sense what that silence contains. Men too are judged in market terms shaped by bodily expectation. Strength, age, skill, obedience, and apparent health affect price. A blacksmith may fetch more than a common field hand. A young man considered strong and durable becomes especially valuable to a cotton planter. Such valuation is often described with the kind of commercial admiration usually reserved for sturdy timber or productive mules. The insult is total. To be considered valuable within slavery is not to be respected. It is to be priced well. There is an odd detail in some sale practices that reveals the effort to make this brutality look respectable. Advertisements and notices could present human beings in clipped, tidy wording, almost like household goods listed for practical readers: age, sex, complexion, skills, temperament, terms, no tears included, no screaming child, no desperate bargaining by kin. The paperwork performs calmness so the market can pretend to be ordinary commerce. That bureaucratic neatness may be one of the bleakest quirks of the whole system. A few measured lines on paper contain enough violence to alter generations. The domestic trade also changes the culture of Mississippi itself. Many plantations are populated by people from different regions, bringing varied dialects, customs, foodways, and memories into forced contact. A person from Virginia may share a cabin row with someone born in Alabama or the Carolinas. Songs shift, stories travel, cooking methods blend, religious styles mingle. Grief creates new communities among the displaced. This cultural mixing can be painful in origin and rich in consequence. The market tears people from one world and throws them into another, and from that violence new forms of connection emerge despite everything. Scholars continue to argue over how often planters sold people for purely financial reasons versus disciplinary reasons or family settlement, because records are incomplete and motives overlap. Debt, punishment, inheritance, expansion, and personal cruelty often blend together. Yet from the perspective of the enslaved, the distinction may matter less than white writers sometimes assume. Whether you are sold because your owner owes money or because he wishes to terrify others, the road away from home feels equally real. Motive does not soften separation. The transport of sold people adds another layer of misery. Overland coffles could involve chaining people together and forcing long marches through heat, mud, and public humiliation. River transport might seem less physically punishing in some cases, but it remains a passage into uncertainty. The sounds of a steamboat, its whistle, paddle churn, deck commotion, can mark the beginning of disappearance for those left behind as much as for those aboard. Imagine watching the river take someone away while the cotton still needs picking the next morning. Plantation life specializes in denying proper time for grief. Owners sometimes speak of sales with appalling casualness. They discuss whether now is a good market, whether a particular person will bring a fair price, whether it is wiser to sell one individual or several, whether a child should remain with the mother because it improves the lot's value. The language of convenience does much of the moral damage here. Not grand hatred, not dramatic declarations, just convenience. The same practical voice used for livestock, wagons, and acreage applied to human beings. Evil often prefers a reasonable tone. It helps business proceed. At the same time, enslaved communities do not respond passively to the threat. News of intended sales travels quickly. People plead, negotiate, hide, run, appeal to favoured mistresses, seek intervention from relatives, or attempt to prove special usefulness. Some create emotional distance as self-protection. Others cling more tightly to loved ones when rumours begin. There is no single correct response to such a condition. Survival does not produce one personality type. It produces 1,000 strategies, all under pressure. The domestic slave trade also reveals just how artificial plantation stability really is. The owner may speak proudly of an orderly estate with disciplined labourers and settled routines, yet at any moment, debt or desire can reorder the human landscape. A cabin row can lose half its members. A child can wake with one set of kin and sleep among strangers weeks later. A man's skill may make him more likely to be sold to another plantation in need of that work. The plantation advertises permanence while practicing constant rupture. You feel that rupture most in the hours after a sale is announced. The quarters change. Voices lower. Someone sits very still. Someone else becomes busy with pointless tasks because movement is easier than feeling. A mother holds a child longer than usual. A husband walks outside because the cabin walls cannot contain his anger. The evening smells the same as any other evening. Smoke, supper, damp dirt. Maybe the sweetness of something cooking in a pot. But the atmosphere is different. Fear gives ordinary air a metallic edge. Every object in the cabin seems suddenly temporary. The market in flesh and cotton shares one deeper logic. Both reduce living processes to yield. The field measures pounds. The trader measures price. The planter moves between those calculations with practiced ease. He sees no contradiction in admiring fertile soil while buying a woman whose children will increase his inventory, or in praising industry while selling a man whose only crime is belonging to a debt-ridden estate. This is why the cotton economy cannot be separated morally from the slave market. They are not neighbouring systems. They are the same machine viewed from different angles. So you remain beside the ledger and the river road and let the full weight of that machine settle in. Cotton bales wait for shipment, horses shift in the yard, A trader speaks in the flat voice of business. Somewhere in the quarters, someone is praying that a name will not be called. Somewhere a child senses the adult's fear and cannot yet name it. The pages in the account book turn with soft, dry sounds. Ink dries. Prices are set. The plantation continues as if all this were ordinary. And in one terrible sense it is. That is the harsh truth. Mississippi cotton in 1850 does not merely consume labour in the field. It reaches into the most intimate bonds of life and sells them when the numbers demand it. Night returns to the plantation with a gentleness the day never earns. The fields cool by slow degrees. Heat lifts from the ground in a faint breath. The sky deepens from gold to violet, then settles into a broad dark blue where the first stars begin to show. From a distance, Mississippi cotton country can look almost peaceful at this hour. The rows lie quiet. The white bowls catch the last light and seem to glow. Tree lines soften into shadow. A porch lamp flickers at the main house. Crickets begin their steady pulse in the grass. You could almost believe this land has forgotten what it demanded from human bodies all day. But the night does not erase the truth. It only lowers its voice. People return from the fields with the sort of tiredness that changes the way they walk. The body is not simply weary, it is used up for the day and already being asked, silently, to prepare for the next. Feet drag more than step. Shoulders slope. Hands hang stiffly or rub at wrists, neck and lower back. Cotton fibres still cling to clothing and hair. Dust has settled into cuffs, hems, and the lines around the eyes. The smell that comes with the returning workers is thick and unmistakable. Sweat dried and renewed. Earth, leaves, smoke from nearby fires, a trace of livestock from the yard, and the faint sharp scent of skin rubbed raw by straps and coarse cloth. The cabins fill again, one by one, with movement that is both routine and deeply personal. Pots are lifted, water is fetched. Children are gathered close. Someone bends over a fire, stirring meal into a pot with practiced motion. Someone else eases onto a stool and sits in silence for a minute because standing has become too much. The air in the quarters grows warm and smoky. Iron lids rattle. Babies fuss and then quiet. Older children speak more loudly than the adults for a little while, not yet weighted down by tomorrow in the same bodily way, though already knowing more than children should. Firelight turns faces amber and throws shadows on rough walls. A cabin at night can look poor in every material sense and still feel rich with presence. Supper is often simple, but evening hunger makes every smell vivid. Cornbread on a skillet, greens if there are greens, pork if there is pork, beans, peas, or sweet potatoes when luck and labour have managed to secure them. The scent of food drifts from one doorway to another, mixing with smoke and damp earth. A person eating after field work is not looking for elegance. The body wants warmth, salt, and enough strength to keep going. Meals at night are not leisurely affairs. They are acts of repair, however incomplete. Each bite tells you what the plantation has withheld, and what the people within it have somehow still made. This nightly return also reveals one of slavery's sharpest contradictions. The plantation spends all day trying to break people into useful units of labour. Then each evening those same people reassemble themselves as families, neighbours, worshippers, storytellers, and caretakers. A mother wipes a child's face with a damp cloth. A man mends a strap or chair leg in dim light. A teenager comforts a younger sibling half asleep on the floor. Someone laughs at a remark so dry and perfectly timed that it cuts through exhaustion for a moment. That laugh matters. It is not foolishness. It is evidence. The sounds of night are different from the sounds of work. The field has commands, hoofbeats, tool strikes, and measured output. The quarters have murmurs, spoon against bowl, low singing, the scrape of a stool, a prayer spoken just above a whisper, the small argument of everyday domestic life. A child asks for water. Someone coughs. Someone sighs heavily while unlacing bad shoes. Farther out, frogs answer from wet ground, and cicadas or crickets keep their steady rhythm as if nature has decided to provide percussion for the evening. You begin to understand why memory of plantation life so often carries sound. The night tells truths the official records do not. Songs rise in this darkness with a particular force. Some are lullabies, some are spirituals, some are fragments of melody barely above a hum, used to calm the self as much as the child nearby. A song at night can hold grief and peace together without needing to resolve them. The tune may drift from one cabin and be taken up softly in another. It does not need an audience beyond the people who need it. White planters may hear such sounds and imagine contentment, because power often mistakes endurance for approval. But the feeling in these songs is more layered than that. It can contain longing, sorrow, faith, irony, memory, and a kind of inward steadiness that no overseer can weigh. Music was not the only thing that filled plantation nights. Stories mattered too. A tale told after supper could entertain children, sharpen wit, offer warning, or preserve older cultural patterns under altered conditions. Trickster figures appeared often in African American oral tradition for a reason. In a world where the strong and lawless seem to rule openly, stories about the weak surviving through cleverness become more than amusement. They become commentary. A rabbit outwitting a fox may look like a child's tale by firelight. It may also be a social theory compact enough to carry in the mouth. That is one of the quirky beauties of enslaved culture in Mississippi and across the South. Meaning often travelled in forms small enough to pass unnoticed by hostile power. A riddle, a hand clap pattern, a way of seasoning food, a proverb. A tale that makes children giggle, while adults hear something sharper beneath it. History can miss such things because they leave fewer documents behind than laws or account books. But the plantation itself could not function without constantly encountering people whose inner lives were richer than its categories allowed. Night can also be the time for worship in forms less supervised than Sunday services arranged by whites. In a cabin, a clearing, or a hidden meeting place, prayer moves differently. Knees bend on hard floors, hands clasp. Someone speaks from scripture or memory. Someone else testifies softly. The language of bondage and deliverance takes on immediate force. You smell warm bodies, old wood, candle smoke if a candle is available. Perhaps only the remnants of supper and the night air creeping in around the door. The atmosphere is intimate, charged, and careful. Faith here is not a decorative virtue. It is shelter. A broad historical truth belongs firmly in this scene. Enslaved communities throughout the antebellum South built rich nighttime social and religious lives despite relentless daytime labour, using evenings for family care, worship, music, and the preservation of cultural identity. That does not make the nights easy. It makes them essential. Without these hours, however limited, the plantation would have consumed even more of the self than it already did. Children often experience the evening differently from adults. Fatigue reaches them too, of course, but sleep can arrive before despair fully forms. A little one nods off against a shoulder while the fire still burns. Another fights sleep to hear the end of a story and loses. The touch of a child growing heavier in your lap as sleep takes hold is one of the softer facts in a hard place. Adults may study those sleeping faces with tenderness and fear at once, imagining futures they cannot secure. Yet for a few night hours the child belongs to warmth, breath, and family presence rather than to the field or the market. That temporary safety matters. For older people, the evening may bring pain into focus. Work can distract the body by forcing it onward. Rest allows old injuries to speak again. Knees stiffen, backs throb, hands swell, eyes strain in low light. Still, elders remain crucial to the community. They remember names, remedies, births, lineages, stories, prayers, old places, old songs. In a system designed to rupture continuity, memory becomes a form of wealth. An elder speaking in a cabin at night may be carrying more inheritance than any planter leaving silverware to a son. There are nights when fear enters the quarters and changes everything. A rumour of sale, word of punishment, news from another plantation, the arrival of strangers in the yard, the absence of someone overdue from a visit. Even in those moments, the night is where people gather to absorb the shock together. Silence may become heavier. Conversation grows clipped. Someone stares into the fire too long. Someone prays more urgently. Someone decides before dawn to run. to plead, to hide, or to endure, the plantation reaches into the night with threats of its own. But the night also gives people a place to feel those threats collectively, rather than alone under the sun. Moonlight alters the landscape in strange ways. The cotton fields that looked harsh at noon become pale and almost spectral, as if the land has put on a quiet face to conceal its habits. Cabins sit low and dark except for pinpoints of firelight. The big house, if lit, seems detached from the human exhaustion that supports it. You may hear a piano there, or conversation drifting from the porch, the clink of glass. The sort of ease that depends on believing comfort is natural. Across the yard, someone in the quarters is washing a child's feet or rubbing sore shoulders with practiced hands. Two worlds share one night sky and almost no justice. Historians still disagree over how much time enslaved people actually had for social and spiritual life after labour, because seasons, plantation size, and local discipline varied so much. Some evenings must have been nearly swallowed by chores and exhaustion. Others allowed more gathering, more singing, more whispered conversation. That uncertainty should not surprise you. Slavery was never experienced in one exact way. Still, no matter how narrow the available time, people used it. The hours after dark became a vessel for whatever life could still be claimed. You begin to see that the true cost of the cotton empire is not only measured in labour extracted by day, but in the shape of rest at night. Even sleep is burdened. A person lies down carrying sore muscles, worry for children, fear of sale, unfinished grief, and the certainty of another dawn command. Dreams, when they come, must enter a crowded room, yet there is also closeness in that room. Breath shared in darkness. A child tucked under an arm, a soft hum fading into silence, a hand resting on a rough blanket near another hand. These are small things. Small things are often what survive history best in the body, if not always in the archive. And so the plantation settles, fires burn lower, crickets continue, the stars sharpen overhead. One by one the cabins grow quieter except for coughing, shifting, murmured prayer, and the ordinary sounds of sleep approaching. The great cotton machine does not stop, not really. The crop still waits in the field. The ledger still waits on the table. The law still waits behind both. But night allows another reality to be felt more clearly, the humanity of the people the plantation tries to reduce to labour. You hear it in song, you see it in tenderness, you feel it in the patience with which one tired person still reaches toward another. Now let the darkness soften around the cabins and the fields. Let the porch lights dim in your mind until only a few warm glows remain. The day's harsh sounds have fallen away, leaving crickets, distant frogs, and the hush of night air moving through trees. The rows of cotton are no longer demands or numbers. They are only pale shapes under the moon. The rough cabins, for all their hardship, hold breathing families, cooling fires, and the faint comfort of people resting near one another. A child sleeps. An elder murmurs a prayer that drifts into silence. Someone hums one final line of a song too soft for the fields to hear. The river keeps moving somewhere beyond sight, slow and steady in the dark, carrying moonlight on its surface like a secret no ledger can record. The heat loosens its grip. The ground gives back the day's warmth and then lets it go. Above everything, the stars remain calm and distant, watching without judgment, as if the sky itself has decided to be gentle at last. You can feel the whole plantation growing quieter now, not healed, not redeemed, but temporarily at rest beneath the night. So let your thoughts move slowly with that stillness. Let the smoke thin, the voices fade, the fields blur into shadow, and the long Mississippi night close softly over the land at last.